staff writer for The New Yorker, Jonathan Blitzer. His new opinion piece for the magazine is titled Donald Trump's Deportation Obsession. Jonathan, good morning. So where does this obsession come from? Let's just start with that. What's the guiding philosophy here?
I think Trump, more than really any other contemporary politician, has defined himself, his own brand, as basically being someone who is going to enforce the immigration laws to a degree we've never seen before. And he's gone so far, in fact, that he's exceeded the existing laws. And so he's promised a campaign of mass deportation. And in the process of that campaign, where he's trying to, prove to his supporters that he's willing to do anything and everything to, treat immigrants harshly, he has started to do things that really raise major questions about the administration's suspension of the rule of law, ignoring judges' orders, ignoring immigration judges' orders, ignoring federal judges' injunctions, the Supreme Court's injunctions, and so on, invoking a law from 1798 to basically summarily deport people without any due process, branding them gang members without any evidence. People aren't even sure what the charges are against them, and they've basically been shipped to what, in effect, is a legal black site in a third country.
And there has been a wing of the Republican Party that's wanted this for a long time. You write about that. There's also, of course, when I was there, another wing that was sort of like the more Reagan wing, which was let as many immigrants in as want to come in. It's better for our economy. But Donald Trump, though, if you look at his approval numbers, they're upside down, especially on inflation, on the economy, on things they've never been upside down on. But you look at his numbers on immigration, and they're up there. Like, they would far rather us be talking about immigration and Abreu Garcia than talking about Jay Powell or the stock markets. And they will exit. And they will tell you, please, they're thinking, please talk about, immigration instead of Hexit, immigration instead of tariffs, immigration instead of the market, because his numbers are strong on immigration.
Well, you're zeroing in on something that I think has really befuddled Democrats, which is the fact that, his numbers seem strong on immigration. I do really think, and I insist, that although people in general, when you look at polling, say, okay, they're okay with the idea of mass deportation, or okay with the idea of increased immigration enforcement and so on, what we're actually seeing is something far harsher than anything he's promised, something far uglier than anything he said he would do. I do think that by and large, if Americans followed closely what was happening to people who were caught up in this immigration enforcement dragnet, I do think they would be appalled. But it's up to Democrats to really hold his feet to the fire. And right now, I think they're anxious about it.
Well, I think immigration's one issue, but I think Abreu Garcia, as flawed as he is in many ways, if you look back at his history, well, I'm talking about him as a person. If you look at him as a person, that might not be somebody that people say, oh, this is who we want to, go down and visit in El Salvador, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. And yet at the same time, that is breaking through. I had a debate with a friend of mine who was like, oh, Democrats are so stupid. I said, I'm not so sure they're so stupid. I think this is so heinous that even with a guy that has a very complicated past, it is breaking through. And what did we see on Joe Rogan's show?
Well, we'll talk about that in just a moment, but you heard from his union where they were saying, bring our brother home.
Bring our brother home.
4 House Democrats were in El Salvador yesterday in an effort to get Kilmar Abrego Garcia released and to demand updates on him and other migrants who are imprisoned there. There are extremely harsh conditions at this prison where people are denied food and tortured. And worse, the trip comes just a week after Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen met with the wrongfully removed Maryland man, and the members of Congress met with local human rights organizations and officials at the U.S. Embassy. Salvadoran officials denied their requests to meet with Abrego Garcia themselves.
And I do think, I think this case, against all odds, I think this case is breaking through with the American people.
Yeah, and you mentioned podcaster Joe Rogan. Well, he's criticizing the Trump administration for its lack of support for due process in immigration deportations. like in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's forced removal. Here's some of what Joe Rogan said on his show last week.
I think due process exists for a reason, and the reason is it is horrific for someone to be accused of something they didn't do, be imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit, and then live in a cell, live in a cage with a bunch of
people who did commit.
Here it is, Benjamin Franklin. It's better 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer. That is wisdom.
Yeah.
That has survived hundreds of years. It's incredibly accurate, and it is the foundation of freedom. Like, we have to make sure that these people are actually guilty, otherwise we become monsters. You can't, like, what is that? When you fight monsters, be careful that you don't become one.
Become one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very important. It's very important. You know, you can't do that. To support one side of this, you have to deny some, like, basic human values. Either way. Like, to support just rounding people up and just assuming they're all gang members. I'm not saying they're doing that, but this is the worst case scenario, right?
Yeah.
They get a bunch of people in a room, they rope them all in, and one guy's just someone's cousin picking someone up to give him a ride home. That's possible.
And now you're back on the one innocent person and now you're right back.
And what if that dude is not doing anything wrong and he's got some stupid tattoos and they decide that this guy's a gang member, and now you're in a prison in El Salvador and you're not even from El Salvador. And now, you know, you were just a hairdresser or you were a tattoo artist.
Family man,
you are.
yeah.
You came over here and maybe you got a green card and maybe you don't. Maybe you were just given asylum, because a lot of people from Venezuela were given asylum in America.
Yeah.
And then you get shipped to El Salvador, where you're not even from El Salvador. So that the fact that that exists scares the out of me. The problem with things that are going in a radical direction, and then there's an overcorrection. So the overcorrection is lack of due process. The overcorrection is like round them all up, ship them to jail. Like, that's like some things that you say when you're not thinking things through. Like, what do you do about all the criminals? Take them all, send them to El Salvador.
Yeah.
What about due process? No, that. But here's the problem with that. What if you are an enemy of, let's not say any current president. Let's pretend we got a new president, totally new guy in 2028. And this is a common practice now of just rounding up gang members with no due process and shipping them to El Salvador. You're a gang member. No, I'm not. Prove it. What? I got to go to court. No,
Yeah.
no due process.
That's
Right?
dangerous, Joe.
That's dangerous.
dangerous.
That's dangerous. That's dangerous. We got to be careful that we don't become monsters while we're fighting monsters.
Let's be clear, Joe Rogan endorsed Donald Trump for president. He's largely supportive of his agenda. He's a hugely influential platform there. And Jonathan, I was struck, and then Joe, I know you said so as well. He kept going back, this is frightening, this is dangerous, because there's a sense, first of all, even Mr. Abrego Garcia, others who are currently in that prison in El Salvador did not receive due process. The Trump administration thinks they've picked the right villain. That's what they've said. They think that this is the person they want to scapegoat. Not only are these people who have rights and due process, but there is this undergirding fear that I think Rogan hinted at there. Well, it might start with them, but it can move to other groups too, including any of us.
Yeah, and the president, to be clear, is explicit on this point. He said that he would like to send convicted Americans to this prison in El Salvador. So this is not a hypothetical. But I also think it's important to note that when journalists, when lawyers have dug into the actual specifics of some of these cases, obviously it's impossible to dig into all of them because the government won't share any information. But when people have dug into the specifics of these cases, it's become clear that the people the United States government is saying are gangsters and are terrorists are in fact not. There is no evidence proving the government's claim, and yet the government is hiding the ball and saying, well, no, trust us, we have the information. This is precisely why due process is so important. You right now have, 250 Venezuelans who are languishing in a Salvadoran prison who weren't able to see the charges against them. When we have looked in a few cases at the charges, we see that they're based basically on nothing, on things like tattoos that are, the suggestion is somehow that these tattoos suggest gang membership. We know for a fact that they don't. Circumstantial evidence that people can contest. And yet, these people are being disconnected from their families, their lawyers. It's impossible to communicate with them. The only reason we know these people are in a prison in El Salvador is because the news media has broken the names of these people. The United States government hasn't even shared that in federal court under judges' orders.
Yeah, and you know, Rev, that's something that Mika continually is concerned about and talks about all the time, which is we're focusing on Abrego Garcia, and yes, that's a good thing, but it's almost like we're forgetting the other 200, 300 that had the same exact thing happen to them. And the White House thinks they can call them terrorists, call them gang members. How do we know? And again,
And they may be.
it's something I haven't
Some
said
of
on
them
this
may be.
show before. Like Joe Rogan said, prove it.
Right.
You know, there's that great scene in Absence of Malice where Paul Newman just sits back in his chair and he goes, prove it.
Right.
And that's how I feel every time I see somebody in the White House going, oh, they're terrorists.
They have a tattoo.
Oh, they're gang members because they have a Real Madrid tattoo or because they're wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey. I mean, you're like, come on, you're going to have to do better than that. And how stupid do you think we are? Obviously, Joe Rogan not buying it, and a lot of people that listening to Joe Rogan not buying it.
No.